Good morning. Welcome back to English 112. Thank you for tuning in today. Um, I'm still home on quarantine at the moment, so I'm having to record today's lecture about Enemy of the People so we can keep moving forward. The Enemy of the People that's found on Blackboard from the Project Gutenberg website, of course, is the original Ibsen version of that play. Often when people go out and find it at the bookstore, they find the Arthur Miller version. Um, they're basically the same play in English. They really are kind of a strange translation set. I'm going to be talking about the Ibsen play primarily today because he wrote it. If you're looking at the Miller, besides some Ibsen facts and trivia, the rest will be applicable. The names are the same. So, either version, just make sure that when you're writing a paper about it, you're very clear if you're using the Ibsen version or the Miller version. But for the most part, they are the same. So I want to talk first, before we get into Ibsen's Enemy of the People, I want to give you a little background on playwright Henrik Ibsen, particularly his other big play, A Doll's House from 1879. A Doll's House is not required for this semester. Hopefully you did read it in high school world literature class. When I taught at North Gaston, go Wildcats, I always was sure to spend some time on Ibsen's Dollhouse. It's one of the best world literature plays out there. I thought it had a lot to still say to modern audiences. The odd part about Ibsen's Dollhouse is that it was highly controversial when he wrote it, but I had to take time every semester to explain why it was controversial because my students understood the play fine. They had no trouble following the characters and their motivations, understanding the themes, but my students never knew why it was controversial. I had to kind of go over that in detail. So I'm going to start there, this highly controversial play and why it's controversial. And then we'll talk about his next major play, which is An Enemy of the People. So A Doll's House is a family story. It takes place largely in one home setting. Most theaters, when they're staging this play, make it look like a doll's house, as if you're looking in the side of a children's playhouse there. And so then the characters just become dolls on the stage. It's kind of the thematic idea. It is a family play. It's a family drama in a lot of ways. You're looking at the Helmer family. The patriarch, the man of the family, is Torvald Helmer, who is sick and has some really good lines in the play, but doesn't do a lot because he's probably dying. His doctor shows up, Dr. Rank, some business associates. But the only other main character I want to talk about today in a quick recap is Nora Helmer, the wife. This, of course, being in 1879, was a modern play at the time. It was set contemporary to the 1870s, which made it modern in its time period, but antique to you. And Torvald Helmer had had a really nice job, had made a lot of good money, always had this really lovely house. There's a maid and cook characters and children that kind of walk through at one point, kind of ushered off to bed. This is taking place right before Christmas celebrations. And Torvald's been sick for some time. Torvald's needed the rest cure, probably for something like tuberculosis, something that would be fatal in the 1870s. And Torvald's been sick for some time. He's been able to work. He's been unable to make money. And so he's been able to really provide for the household. In his absence, his wife, Nora, has tried to keep the household running. Modern audiences will see that as being very progressive and very probably responsible financially. The 1870s audience didn't understand it that way. Torvald, particularly, will not understand it. He does not think his wife should have any part of the household budget and the money. He does not think that she should be taking care of any of that. And so he is quite upset by her, and about her. At the end of the play, kind of jumping ahead quickly, she's had to keep the house floating. She's had to take out some loans. She's had to try to borrow some money because she cannot work, because she's an upper class kind of person, not lowly like the maid who has a job and is making her own money. Or like her friend, Mrs. Lind, who shows up, who's a secretary, who is on her own and kind of a model for what Laura wants to be when she grows up in many ways, despite the fact she's already an adult. But anyway, it's at the end of the play. At the end of the play, it's all about to come crashing down. The loans are due. There's no money. There's no money to pay for the Christmas bills. There's no money to pay for continuing services for Torvald. He's probably about to die anyway. And Nora's going to bring shame down on the family by having taken these loans and not being able to pay them back, and then kind of bankrupting her family, trying to keep it afloat. So Nora does what she thinks she has to do, and she leaves. She runs off on her family, takes off, hopes the debt will follow her. It probably won't, because she has no financial stake, because she was not really a person. In the 1870s, she couldn't own property. She could not take out loans except from shady people. So all that's going to default back to her husband, Torvald, who's too sick to pay them off. He's probably going to die. The house is going to be left in ruin. The kids are probably going to wind up in orphanages, if not sold to factories. And Nora's a free woman. The end of the play is quite dour, quite melancholy, because she runs off and abandons the family to die without her. When this play was originally staged, people walked out. People walked out very dissatisfied, because the ending of the play, showing this woman trying to take agency in her own life, abandoning her family, not being a good mother because she abandoned the family, the 1870s audience did not appreciate that. It's hard to explain that to my students, 10, 15 years ago when I taught with Gaston. Many of them had homes with only one parent in it, or with multiple parents in it, because divorce is such an inevitable part of life. When I taught at North Gaston a decade ago, very few of my students actually had the original mother and father in their original marriage in their original home. That's just not the modern moment, with divorce rate being what it is. And so that controversy was lost on them. And I had to explain to them that controversy every semester, because they didn't get that part. They understood why she ran off. Some people thought she was justified. Some folks thought that made a lot of sense. They probably did the same thing. But they didn't quite get the controversy of why an audience would be so upset by that. Somewhere between modern media and their modern experiences and the truly contemporary day to your own, the very 2000s era day. That was lost in translation as 1870s play. Why is it controversial? In fact, Ibsen's Dollhouse was so controversial, directors forced him to write a second ending to it. The one that winds up in most high school textbooks, luckily, is Ibsen's original ending, with Nora running off the way he intended it to be. But there is a second ending that you can find if you start reading Doll's House and really getting into your Ibsen collection. There's a second ending that the playwright was forced to write, with a happy ending, which Ibsen hated, by the way. Ibsen wanted to be dark and depressing. It's kind of Ibsen's thing. So that brings us to Enemy of the People, Ibsen, 1882, his next major play. If you're kind of looking at the greatest hits of Ibsen, Doll's House is probably his top hit. Enemy of the People is his second greatest hit here. Ibsen's Enemy of the People. Now, on one hand, this is a contemporary play to the 1880s, so it's very much a modern play of its time, which means it's 200 years old to you and may feel like a relic of the past. There are many ways to stage the play. When we're talking about plays, one of the conversations that we need to kind of think about is, what is the director going to do to put this in front of an audience? Are they going to make it look like an 1880s play? That's a very common idea, much like the Ibsen's Dollhouse in the previous slide. Here we have a director and a set director that's trying to use period furnishings and period costumes and make it look like an 1880s play. It's a very popular thing to do. Look at that kid's suit and his hat, his little boots. Isn't that nice? That's a very popular thing to do, to make it kind of preserve that 1880s. Sometimes that winds up creating a disconnect between the audience and the play itself, because you're looking at antique play. Now you're thinking about antique ideas. Other directors will stage it in modern dress, modern clothes, modern set dressings, and try to bring this 1880s play into the modern era. And I think that's what Arthur Miller was trying to do with it, was trying to bring it from this ancient European play and put it in front of a contemporary audience in a contemporary American way. Which is surprising, it didn't change the names, which are very European-esque names. It didn't make it Bob and Sally and Fred, and very simple American names for the audience. But Miller didn't in the translation, so who knows? It's what a power of the playwright has to be ceded over to the power of the director, the set dresser, the costumer, the lighting and sound people. We're going to use an 1880s sounding mob, or we're going to have a mob at the door that sounds like a modern contemporary mob, and mix in some modern contemporary politics slogans in there. Are we going to have 1880s looking banners for advertising the hot springs and the rest cure and the lobby to kind of get people in this mindset, or we're going to put up 1880, very contemporary modern politics ads to kind of get them thinking about the modern period. And the ideas of this play are very contemporary in a lot of ways, very in the now moment contemporary, in your generation contemporary. We have a discussion of science versus tradition, which I think still resonates in the modern classroom. We have a discussion of the economy versus science, which I really think resonates now. I'm having to do this impromptu lecture instead of doing it in class with you as a discussion because I'm at home in quarantine during a pandemic. Should I decide to use this video later, I want to point out that it is currently 2022, which is a fake sounding date. I never thought I'd live to see something like 2022. I sound like science fiction when I was growing up. But 2022, this weird science fiction sounding year, is compounded because we're in the middle of a pandemic that's been going on for 3 years globally. And there's been a lot of discussion. Should you listen to this in the future beyond 2022 and trying to think about what makes this weird time period so strange? There's a lot of discussion about science versus the economy. Do we try to protect people, or do we try to keep the capitalism going? Patriarchy, capitalism, science. Good stuff in the modern media right now. So there's a lot of control by the director in a play. There's also a lot of control by the actors. The director may have a vision of the play, but the actors have to execute it. How lines are inflected and given and recited matter. How it's all stage dressed to the audience matters. In a movie version, you have one set of choices made, and then everybody watching that movie until the end of time, end of DVDs, end of beta discs, end of streaming services will see that vision in that same way. Audience still has the power to understand it in the way they want to understand it and take from it what they will, but that vision is preserved. In a play, that vision is a little bit more malleable. It changes night to night. I've seen plays, multiple, same cast, same theater, same director. I've had the privilege to watch the same play 6, 7 times. Sometimes I love plays. In a non-pandemic time, I'm a big advocate for going to the play and going to theater. Something my live theater, my family loves that. So we'd go, several times the same play because every night is slightly different. The timing is a little bit different. The line delivery is a little different. The attitude and perception of the actors is a little bit different based on what they're going through. And so watching the same play multiple times can be very beneficial to seeing the range of how it can be done. So I want to advocate for that. We're reading a play. You're always reading the possibilities of the play. There's a lot of those possibilities when it's acted and directed and live that are made, and there's a lot of choices being made before the audience ever forms their opinion of it. And reading a play is probably not the best way to do it, quite honestly. I often tell students that they would actually like Shakespeare if they watched it, but that reading Shakespeare is horrible, and he never intended you for you to read it. That's why he never wrote them down. But a play is a thing, right? So I do want to kind of cover our main characters a little bit and kind of a couple main themes. As we're going through this play, you have to kind of keep in mind who's talking to who, what conversations are being had, and the relationship between all the characters on the stage. And there's a few more characters than I've listed here that are not that important. I want to list kind of the major characters, talk about their relationships for a moment. So you've got Dr. Thomas Stockman, who's probably our central person here. We also have Mayor Peter Stockman, the brother of Dr. Thomas Stockman, Mrs. Stockman, who's the wife of Dr. Thomas Stockman, Petra, which is the oldest daughter, who is of some age, probably about ready to be married off, go to college, if that's an option in their financial bracket and time period in Central Europe in the 1880s. Captain Horster, who is a landowner and has some financial stake and everything. And then, of course, Hofstede, the editor, who's got this newspaper article that he may or may not publish for Dr. Stockman, may or may not tell the truth for Dr. Stockman, may or may not be a utensil of Mayor Peter Stockman. Mayor Peter Stockman's a quick way to talk about Peter. He is also the head of every committee in town. It's a small town. He's head of every committee in town. He's in charge of the baths. He's in charge of the entire economy. And the central point between these two brothers, which again is a very family play, because Ibsen liked that family tension in a lot of ways. It's a recurring theme throughout a lot of his plays. But it's a very family play. There's a disagreement between some family members. How are they going to resolve that disagreement? This becomes a little bit stranger because it's such a small town in Europe where it's initially set, or California if you read the Miller play. It's such a small town that only has one piece to its economy. And the only viable piece of the economy of this small town is the baths. It's these tourist attraction baths where people are coming to take a rest cure. They're coming to cure their tuberculosis and other ailments. They're coming for kind of medical retreat. That's really the main purpose of this town. Everything else, the farms, the bakery, everything else is in service of that. Should the baths be shut down, Mayor Stockman knows that the entire economy of the city will fall apart. The little town will fall apart. They're all going to starve to death. They're going to die penniless and hungry if the baths don't make it, because the entire fortune of this town is dependent on the baths, the rest cure, this medical tourism, antique aspect as that is. In the 1880s, what they did not know about tuberculosis and some other ailments that we take the medical knowledge for granted is very common still in the 1880s for this rest cure to be prescribed, kind of isolation, rest, good air, hot baths, open up your lungs. Maybe you'll breathe better and not, choke death on your own phlegm. Antique knowledge like that, antique medical knowledge. Maybe we know more after the Second World War. We learn a lot about how to take bodies apart and put them back together again. After the Second World War, it's a great advancement in science. But in the 1880s, that's kind of temporary knowledge, is that these baths work. These baths are going to work. And because of that, it's the entire town's economy. What Dr. Stockman brings up is a modern scientific approach. Modern, of course, in the 1880s sense here. This modern science that he says proves that the baths are dangerous, the baths are going to kill people, the baths are polluted, there's something wrong here, the baths need to be stopped. And so we have the central problem between Thomas Stockman and Peter Stockman. Sometimes that is discussed as the truth. The truth, what is the truth? That's an interesting way to talk about this and frame this. Peter Stockman thinks his truth is more important than Thomas Stockman's. Peter Stockman thinks that the proof of these baths having worked for so long, as tangential proof, is truth enough. Thomas Stockman, the educated Dr. Thomas Stockman, is putting his truth in modern science. Both of these men have a truth, have a valid point of view they're looking at, and they think their point of view is correct based on what they understand about the world. So they both have a truth. It's not like Dr. Stockman has the truth and Mayor Peter Stockman is trying to hide the truth. Both these men have a truth, right? Mrs. Stockman, supporting character in a lot of ways. And so it's Petra, Horster, and Hofstede. All the rest of them want to be supporting characters to Thomas and Peter. It's really their play. Everybody else is kind of fleshing out the world and giving us ideas about the world. It's interesting to look at how Mrs. Stockman treats her husband. I mean, she's somewhat deferential, somewhat 1880s. She is the wife, he is the husband. But she does, when they're in private, when there's just the two of them, she does speak her mind a little bit, which is very typical of the 1880s. The wife quiet at home, quiet in public, but very vocal in the house, is a very 1880s European attitude. It's the way their patriarchy was working. She had a power, just not a power in public. Right. And she does support him, sort of. Pay attention to what Mrs. Stockman says to her husband, especially when they're alone, about the truth and about change and about the nature of everything. Because she sort of sounds like she's on Peter's side in terms parts of that conversation. While she's supporting her husband, she also sounds like Peter's got some points. Of course, Captain Horster and Hofstede wind up swept up into this with their own kind of agendas and trying to sort out whose agenda is correct. Right, there's a mob scene at the end, which is also trying to figure out who is correct, kind of a mob politic idea. And so there's a truth aspect here, which I think we need to talk about. There's a family aspect here, which we need to talk about, because the family is being divided. No matter what the outcome at the end of the play is, the family is being divided. Right, it's never going to be the same. This family is never going to recover for many reasons. So we got a family being divided. We've got truth being divided. We have a very family-oriented piece. I think what's more important besides the theme of truth, especially in a 2022 modern era sense, is this science versus the economy. This is a discussion that we see playing out in modern social media, modern news channels, just modern media in general is having this same discussion of science versus the economy. Do we let a pandemic spread just to keep factories open, or do we let people starve because we had to separate them for their own good? How are we resolving that? And maybe it's the peculiarity of 2020s that make me think that's probably the most important theme, science versus the economy. But I think that science versus economy is how they're framing the truth. I think Peter's seeing it one way as being a pro-economy person. I think Dr. Stockman seeing another way, being a pro-science person. I'm not really sure Ibsen's opinions on it matter at all. One of the things that I like to discuss when we're going over this is, who do you think the hero is? This is a good spot for class discussion at some point. If you see your classmates in the hallway or message them, this is a good thing to talk about with your classmates in and outside of class. Who do you think the hero of this play is? I think Ibsen has a hero in mind. I think Ibsen has a viewpoint he thinks is more important than the other. I think Ibsen has something he's trying to say. That viewpoint can be lost. Ibsen's viewpoint can be lost when the director doesn't agree with it, or when actors don't fully understand it. And I think when an audience reading this play in a trapped form, like a textbook or a website like Gutenberg that has the text of the play, I think that it's the readers and directors and actors' opinion of who is right and wrong that really is going to come across. I think when you're reading it by yourself, it's then you that's going to have to judge that more so than Ibsen. Ibsen does have a favorite character. Ibsen does have a point of view that he thinks is correct. But that may not always read to the audience. And so I'm not really concerned about what Ibsen thought. And a lot of times we start looking at Spark Notes or Pink Monkey or those online cheat sheets about what does it all mean, you wind up with a lot of discussion of what did Ibsen really say? What did Ibsen really want? Let's look at Ibsen's other plays and compare them and see what Ibsen's headspace is when he's writing. I don't really think that matters. I think what matters is what comes across to the audience. In this case, the audience is you because you are reading it. And who do you think the hero is? The popular answers, of course, are somewhere between the mayor and the doctor. Do you think that Dr. Stockman is the hero because he represents a new voice, a new generation, a new idea of science being more important than other things, and wanting to save the world through the modern science and using rational, logical, scientific evidence to support his viewpoints? That's one way to look at it. Do you think Peter Stockman, the mayor, is the hero? Not because he's burying his head in the sand and trying to resist change, but because he's trying to save the town. Often we forget the fact that he wants to save the economy. That can look like greed if you're not careful, if you're acting in a certain way and emphasizing certain lines. We can see Mayor Peter Stockman as being very greedy and self-centered and in it for himself. But he can also be very altruistic. He may be trying to save the economy of this town, trying to save this town's moving forward. His conservative approach may not be self-interest at all. It might be him trying to save the town. And I think Peter, at least, believes that he is saving the town. I think he believes that Dr. Stockman's trying to kill him. He's trying to kill them all. It's a very odd modern problem. Mrs. Stockman, can she be the hero? She's a minor character in some respects. But is she the most heroic? How about Petra? Petra seems to have the most to lose and the least to gain in this. She sides with her father scientifically and intelligence. She kind of is looking toward new science. But she's also got to find a husband and a community in this small community. And if they leave, she's going to have a harder time doing that because she won't know anybody and have a hard time getting married off and have a good life, which are things that Petra needs. Petra might go to college, but she's still going to need to get married off and have a good life based on who she can marry. and the reactions of the town are going to be very hard on Petra. Um, so maybe she's the hero. Maybe she's the self-sacrificed, gives it all to her father's beliefs, but takes all of the burden um, that he doesn't have to worry with, having some money and some notoriety, and he's got a better shot of continuing his life, where she doesn't have a shot of starting hers if he messes this up. Maybe she's the one that's got the most to lose in the entire play, and truly has the one that's making the hardest choices in the entire play. Maybe her deed is noble and heroic. It is very possible, in a very modern sense, a very 2022-esque sense, to see this play as having no heroes whatsoever. That's the hardest way to write the current paper. If the paper in front of you is explain the hero in An Enemy of the People, with an enthymeme style thesis, then the hardest enthymeme to do is to start with there is no hero, because you have to figure out what the opposite side of that is to make the enthymeme work. That just makes it trickier to write. It's easier to write this paper who is the hero, create an enthymeme, if you have the two ideas, one position being Dr. Stockman, the other position being Mayor Stockman, and then who do you actually agree with? So I don't get too deep into the end of the play. I do want you to finish reading it, and to kind of keep in mind heroics, keep in mind who could be the hero as who you think is most noble. Who would you agree with in this play? As ultimately what's coming across to you as a reader, and who you think is heroic is what do you think about the main ideas, and who do you think you are in this play? Who do you identify with? Who do you understand politically and economically and geographically? Who are you? What do you agree with? These are things you need to wrestle with. I want you to finish reading the play. Clearly, I want you to write an enthymeme about it, which is a one-sentence statement of purpose that sets up an argument in a very particular way. You can review those notes at Blackboard. Ask me about it. I'll help you with it. That's fine. And then ultimately write a paper about it using the play. The play is the thing. And we will pick up and discuss it more later, I am sure. But pandemic being what it is, maybe we won't. Have to wait and see. So I do want you all to stay healthy, to keep reading, to think good thoughts, be ready to write good ideas. If you have any questions, please let me know. But until then, this has been today's lecture on An Enemy of the People. Ibsen, 1882. Have a good day.